Hi class, it's Professor Green with Federal Government. I hope you all are well. Today we're going to look at Chapter 6. We're going to finish out our section, Chapters 1 through 6. I do realize that Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, an enormous amount of, in fact, I'm going to tab, well, I say that. Okay, yeah. So I went through and recorded any law, act, important event that was mentioned in chapters 4, 5, or 6, 12 pages that look like this. So, and this wasn't the information that your book provided. It may have mentioned some of these facts, but I went and documented more things about them. So if you're interested in getting a copy of this, let me know. But I do it in a timeline, so you're more, it kind of helps out if you're looking at it. But anyway, I think it's interesting that they cover that much information in just 3 chapters. So today we're moving on to chapter 6, which the topic is public opinion and political socialization, how the government goes about getting information regarding public opinion, and they use a variety of methods. And then we'll talk about political socialization as well, because as you know, some people are much more political than others, and that might be why some of us find each other annoying. Regardless, this chapter is short and sweet. I think there are only 30 slides with this chapter as opposed to chapter 4 and chapter 5 where I loaded you up. And I wanted to show you guys this document that I created out of everything that was mentioned in chapters 4, 5, and 6 as far as important dates, cases that we talked about, or things that were mentioned. And some of them, you know, we didn't talk about the book, and I documented them all. It ended up being 12 pages. So if you want to look at that, I'm going to upload that as well. And it's just for, you know, don't feel like you have to remember it at all. But I did put it in sequential order as far as dates were concerned. And the book doesn't do that. Things out of place and they don't follow a certain order. But I like to help you out as far as giving you a timeline. And I always hate giving you a historical background of where you're at. Start kind of in the middle of something, and then they'll mention all of these other things. And I think that if you started out with these are the facts and this is when it starts and then move forward, it would be so much more helpful. I try to follow. So shaping the people's voice, and these are from the concept clips that we will play. So key term number 1, public opinion is the politically relevant opinions that are held by ordinary citizens that they express openly. So that is an important factor. They have to outwardly express it. They can't keep it inside. Outwardly express their content, also called a. The second key term is public opinion poll. A poll is a device for measuring public opinion, whereby a relatively small number of individuals, known as, is interviewed for the purpose of estimating the opinions regarded as the population. So you'll see these terms used in the so they take a sample size, just call some random numbers, and they find out how these people feel on certain issues. And then you'll also be given specifics as to how many people they have to call, what the margin of error can be in the poll, when the poll was taken. There are all kinds of things that factor in. So there are all kinds of things that factor into whether or not the poll is representative or accurately representative of the public. So we'll get into that in just a little bit. Key term number 3 is sample, and we just talked about that, and it's just a small number. So when you have a quality control group, they sometimes will do this because they can't look at every single account, especially if you work in a call center. So if you work in a call center, you know that they do call checks. We'll select random numbers, that telephone calls that came in, screenings. That's reflective as to how they're doing as a group. So Anyway, um, it is a valuable way of predicting how things will turn out. It doesn't always turn out exactly as planned. I think in 2016, that was the biggest surprise. I think everybody thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win that election, and then a lot of people, and she did win the popular vote, so they may have been right in being stunned. Regardless, you know, they'll get close, but sometimes they're just off. In fact, in 2018, when Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke, I believe Ted Cruz was showing polling ahead by 8. These polls, while they can take them and you consider them and you consider what others are thinking, you don't necessarily know that that's how everything will work out. All right, sampling error. That's the measure of accuracy of a public opinion poll, mainly a function of sample size and usually expressed in percentage terms. So plus or minus 3 is generally the direction of an opinion, and that is whether the person who's being interviewed or sampled, whether they have a pro or con on a certain issue. So what direction do you lean? Intensity of an opinion, and this should help you out. It's an opinion that refers to how strongly people feel about an issue. So intensity, how intense are you as to your feeling on a certain issue? Salience of an opinion, and this is where you consider or rank this issue relative to the other issues. Now we're moving on to political socialization, and that is the learning process by which people acquire their political. So we don't all grow up in political families. I grew up in one that was much more political than the normal family. My dad would take us out as probably as babies. I don't remember, but definitely in second and third grade, he would have us coming along while he was campaigning. So we got to do a lot of interesting things that other children would probably not be as comfortable with. So we were going to conventions, meeting politicians, issues, public opinion, etc. So that was our life up through college. Even after college, we went to some of these events. So I say that about my experience, but I also understand that some people have zero to very little experience in politics. And one of my students actually approached me and told me that she was scared in class because she thought that she would fail the entire semester because she had graduated this class because it was required. So this particular student ended up doing very well in the class. She passed. Just ask questions if you have any problems or are uncertain about anything that we covered during class. I have a lot of free time on my hands, so reach out to me. I will certainly discuss it with you guys. All right, moving on, the next term is agents of socialization, and they can be categorized as primary agents of socialization or secondary agents. Your primary agents, your secondary agents are your media. So family, church, and school has a more direct impact on how you are shaped politically. So those agents like family and the media that have significant impact on one's party identification. So if you identify with a party, then you have a tendency to lean and vote you feel towards a particular party. And it says see also party realignment, and we'll talk about realignments. Actually, we have talked a little bit about realignment. So you have a critical issue, critical election, and so you don't have those very often, but we will possibly talk about it a little bit more. I'm not sure. Ideology, we've already had the whole concept clip played out of what is a political ideology, so reference back to that video if you need to, but it's a general. Okay, now we get into our types, and I would group, you might group 11 and 12 together, but I would group 15, 16, 17, where you would fall on the political compass. And I'm going to have you guys take would land on the scale. Would you be an economic liberal? Would you be an economic conservative? We'll discuss what each of these mean, and you'll see in the upcoming slides. So I won't go into detail about each one of those. Delegate and trustee are just types of attitudes that your representatives are going to have. Type attitude where they want to go out what their constituents want. What do you want? What do you need from me? So they serve as the delegate of the people. The trustee, however, is for your more experienced candidates, possibly your senators, who they expect you to trust them in their opinion. And so they're not going to reach out like one would with their delegate position. And members of the House generally are more of your delegate types. And that's because they run for senators that are an advantage. All right, moving on. So our learning objectives for Chapter 6. 6.1 is to describe how public opinion is. 6.2 is to describe how. 6.3 is to summarize demographic characteristics that influence political opinion. Demographic characteristics, male, all types of things factor in. Political scientists use this information and often use it very accurately. Will play out. Learning objective 6.4 is to demonstrate comprehension of Americans' opinions about politics. And then 6.5 is to summarize the relationship between public opinion and public opinion is how the American public, the law that the government passes, should it reflect, how the public feels? You would think so. Does it always? So we'll get into that. So 6.1, let's describe how public opinion is measured. How are public opinion polls evaluated? Do make sure to watch this clip. Listen to the things that are mentioned throughout so that you could answer these questions. Generally, I make you answer the questions yourself, but because we're online, we'll just do it as a class together.
Introductory Concepts in American Government. How are public opinion polls evaluated? Public opinion is the population's expressed views. Political public opinion focuses on views on political institutions, political actors, and political events. Public opinion polls measure the views and opinions of politics. Public opinion information is used to gauge the quality of government, assess the decision-making ability of leaders, and provide the context for shaping the public discourse on political issues. Common polls survey the public on important issues: partisan identification, election tracking, and approval of the President and Congress. In order to have results that can be generalized to the broader public, political polls use a random sample of people chosen arbitrarily from the general population. Political polls typically use randomly dialed telephone numbers as their selection mechanism. Random phone numbers minimize the potential for selection bias, the excessive selection of similar respondents. Poll results are generated from data collected and measured by sampling the general population. There are several elements to evaluate when considering public opinion polls and whether they can be generalized to the broader population. Full disclosure of how a poll was conducted provides key information to evaluate poll results. Full disclosure details include the nature of polling, question wording and answer options, and margin of error. What is the time frame? Does this reflect recent opinions? Who conducted the poll? The nature of polling includes information about which organization administered the poll. Suspicion should arise if the polling information is untimely or if the polling agency is known for close affiliation with ideological or partisan groups. The nature of polling includes information about when the poll was administered as well as information about who was polled. Sample size, or N, should be 1,000 to 1,500 minimum to bestow confidence in a nationwide survey. Adults nationwide might yield different results than registered voters or likely voters. Skepticism should arise if the question wording is biased, or if the answer options are too narrow or misleading. Are the answer options reasonable? Is the language of the question biased, confusing, or misleading? Here is an example of a biased question. Do you support our Do-Nothing Congress? The answer options in the following poll question are unreasonable. Would you prefer Congress A, work together, or B, end the financial crisis? The margin of error captures the level of selection bias in the sample. Margin of error represents the expected or calculated variation in respondent answers if other samples were asked the same question. We would expect similar results each time we poll a random sample of people from the same population. Margin of error can be thought of as an estimate of sampling quality. The smaller this number is, the more consistent the respondent answers will be across samples. Margins of error that are smaller than plus or minus 4 points are reasonable. Margins of error that are larger than plus or minus 4 points are less trustworthy. Let's evaluate this poll example. Is your overall view of Congress highly favorable, somewhat unfavorable, or highly unfavorable? The question here seems straightforward. We should not anticipate any biased answers. The answer options deserve consideration. Are there too many choices? What is the difference between highly and somewhat? The sample size and margin of error on this poll allow us to be confident that this result would be the same if other samples were asked the same question. Because the question is straightforward, the poll is somewhat recent, the sample size is sufficiently large, and the margin of error is sufficiently small, we can feel confident that this poll presents an accurate view of what Americans think about Congress. Let's evaluate this poll example. The question is, do you have a favorable or unfavorable impression of our unfortunate Do-Nothing Congress? The polling date, March 31st to April 1st of 2012, is several years old and thus not necessarily accurate of views today. The question includes a negative view of Congress. We should expect to see more negative responses than if the question were more neutral. The sample size is under 1,000, which calls into question the quality of the sample. The concern is supported by looking at the margin of error, which is a bit high at plus or minus 4.6. We should be less confident that similar results would be found if different samples were asked the same question. Notice, too, that this poll represents only likely voters. Would the result be different if adults nationwide were included in the sample instead? Because of the dated nature of this poll, the poor question wording, the small sample size, and the large margin of error, we cannot feel confident that this poll presents an accurate view of what Americans think about Congress. Summary: how are public opinion polls evaluated? Public opinion polls can be a valuable tool for gauging what citizens think about the direction of the government. Not all polls include reliable data. In order to feel confident about the results of a poll you are shown, there are several key pieces of information that you will want to verify and evaluate, such as the time frame of the poll, the number of respondents, the administering organization, the description of the sample, the question wording and answer options, and the margin of error.
All right, now I want to follow up with the questions that follow that concept clip. The first question, which of the following is not a common public opinion poll topic? And of the 4 that are listed, 3 deal with elections and party identification and or um, election tracking, presidential approval. 3 deal with politics, and then the other is sports team loyalty. And so that wasn't mentioned in the video, so that's your obvious answer as to the exception here. Number 2, the nature of polling includes information about which of the following, and that is when the poll was administered and who was polled. Number 3, which would be an example of a biased poll question, and it's the one where it says, can you believe what a bad job the president's doing? So it's telling you that there's an answer there already. So it's filling in the information to you. It's not asking you one way or another. And in the courtroom session, there would be an objection there as to leading the witness. It's not giving him or her the opportunity to determine whether or not they think that the president is doing a good job, because they insist that he's doing a bad job. All right, number 4, which is true of the margin of error in a poll? And it's the smaller the margin, the higher the sampling quality. And it says that it should be around 3 or 4 plus or minus. And what is the sample size that is the minimum necessary to bestow confidence on public poll results in the United States? And it's 1,000 to 1,500 individuals. So during election season, and especially if you're on social media, you'll hear maybe some of your friends or family members or professors talk about these polls, and you can always point out things like the sample size and the date that it was taken and other things that you notice within that, if you want to get into some arguments with people that perhaps don't share the same opinions as you. Anyway, I try to get away from that as much as possible. So the measure of public opinion, it said that election results are the traditional method for assessing public opinion, because people will go out and vote to determine whether or not they agree with the person who's currently in office, or they want to bring someone new in. So it says the next thing that it notes is gun control. Gun control is a telling example of the influence of public opinion on government. Public opinion is not something that public officials can ignore, but it is also not something that forces them to take a specific course of action. They have latitude as to what they decide to do. So with this picture, it's Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, and they had a mass shooting. It was the deadliest since Sandy Hook, where 26 children were killed in that incident. And so with these protests, the American public actually got behind these students, and 2/3 of them were agreeable to banning of the AR, or the assault rifle, that was used to commit the murders. And then after that, 90% agreed for more stringent background checks. So the American public was definitely wanting the government to act a certain way, and unfortunately that was not going to happen. There were some changes in Florida, but as far as the nation was concerned, you didn't see a lot of change. Anyway, so that just goes to show you that they'll take public opinion into consideration, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they'll have action as a result. All right, so next, the public opinion poll, the device for measuring public opinion, whereby a relatively small number of individuals, the sample, is interviewed for the purpose of estimating the opinions of a whole community over the population. So they measure a small amount of people to determine how the entire community is likely to vote. The sample is that relatively small number of individuals who are interviewed for estimating the opinions of that entire community or population. So the population includes the citizens of a nation. It depends on who they're interviewing, so whose opinions are being estimated through interviews with a sample of these people. And then sampling error, a measure of accuracy of an opinion poll, mainly a function of sample size, used and usually expressed in percentage terms. So they're looking for a plus or minus there. They note the random selection is key to scientific polling. It's theoretically based on probability sampling. So it says the accuracy of a poll is best expressed in terms of sampling error. All right, objective 6.2. Describe how political opinions are formed. So these are the three, and I forgot to mention that you should have grouped these three, but this shows you that the three have been grouped. Direction, intensity, and salience are how opinion dimensions are characterized. So the direction is the pro or con. Do you have a pro or con on this issue? The intensity, how strongly do you feel about this issue? The salience of opinion, where would you rank this issue in relation to all of these other issues? So pick and choose your battles. Which one do you want, or which would you categorize as more important than the other, so we can take care of that one first. All right, it says, unfortunately, there are problems with polls. Samples are often based on telephone numbers, but some Americans do not have phones, and many also refuse to participate in telephone polls. All right, number 2, polled individuals may be unfamiliar with the issues, and in the event that that occurs, they are to record it as non-opinions. So that's what they should be doing. Number 3, respondents are not always truthful. So yeah, unfortunately, you could, even get a kid on the phone that just makes things up, just playing along. I had a friend like that, just saying. Anyway, that was in junior high. I've matured since then. All right, number 4, poorly worded questions and poorly ordered questions can also affect results. So you want to make sure the order of the questions makes sense and that they're worded properly before asking them. Now we want to move on to learning objective 6.3. We want to summarize the demographic characteristics that influence our political opinion. So there's a lot involved with that, and we'll see the concept clip coming up that shows you what factors in, including demographics, as to why we end up feeling the way that we do and expressing those opinions. So political socialization is the learning process by which people acquire their political opinions, beliefs, and values. And they do so through agents of socialization. And notice that the first word in that definition is agents, so that might be a key indicator of what you're looking for if you have a multiple choice scenario. Those agents, such as family and the media, that have significant impact on citizens' political socialization. And I remember talking to you when we were discussing the definitions that you have primary agents of socialization and you also have secondary agents of socialization. The primary are more important than your secondary, but both influence how you believe, how you feel about certain political or don't feel about certain things. It says that partisanship is a learned response acquired via political socialization, and the process has two distinguishing characteristics, including that it continues throughout a person's childhood or lifetime,